Welcome to Exact Training. This lesson is on the Inventory Control module and how to process inventory adjustment transactions. During this lesson, you will learn about making adjustment transactions. An adjustment to stock transaction records an increase or decrease in the on-hand balance of a part in a particular stock room. Let's get started making adjustment transactions in Inventory Control. These are the steps we'll follow. From the System Manager, we'll go to the Inventory Control module. We will start the Activity menu, Transactions item, and go to the Adjustment tab. There we will enter Part ID and stock location. Begin here in the System Manager and select the Materials tab. And choose the Inventory Control module. From there, choose the Activity menu and select Transactions. And the Transaction window will appear. This lesson is on using the Adjustment tab, so choose that one. In the Transactions window, there are three main panes. The upper left is where you would enter an individual transaction. The lower pane is where you will enter multiple transactions, and the upper right shows the individual parts stock information. Before we dive into the module itself, there are some default settings that you should know about. You can see these by clicking on the Options menu, then on Preferences. These preferences are user-specific. In the Preferences window, you can decide which items to appear on certain screens or reports. If Display Costs is marked, the Cost Unit field displays on all transaction tabs except the Transfer tab. Also, Unit Cost and Extended Cost columns display on the transaction grid. When Display Due Quantities is marked, the Balance Due field displays on selected transactions tabs. Also, the values displayed in the Transaction Grid Quantities column after a query match the value displayed in the Balance Due field for each order. When Display Due Quantities is not marked, the Balance Due field does not display on the selected Transaction tab. A zero value displays in the Transaction Grid Quantities columns for all line items after a query. To display on-hand quantities on the Cycle Count tab, mark the checkbox next to Display on-hand quantities in the Cycle Count box. So if you want one of these items to appear, you will need to place a check mark in this window. Let's take a look at the results of configuring these settings. We will go ahead and place a check mark in each item. Once the checks have been placed, click OK. Then close the transaction window and reopen it so the window can refresh with your new choices. These fields were not visible earlier before we placed the check marks in the Preferences window. The Adjustment Cost field shows the value in dollars of the adjustment. This is the product of the cost per unit multiplied by the adjustment quantity. Now let's talk about the Adjustment tab. Remember that the Adjustments to Stock transaction records an increase or decrease in the on-hand balance of a part in a particular stock room. The current on-hand inventory is displayed in the upper right pane of the transaction window. Enter the adjustment quantities, positive or negative numbers, in the Quantity column. Then highlight the lines to be processed and click the Process button. You can perform several adjustments at once on the adjustment grid. Let's process an adjustment. Select your part by double-clicking the Part ID field and then clicking the Search button to view currently entered parts. When you find one you'd like to use, double-click the row. Now we'll select the stock ID we want to adjust it to and from. Stock IDs should have been set up previously. See the lesson called Adding New Stock IDs if you have not already done so. If a stock ID is already showing, you can erase that one from the selection field by selecting the Clear button. Then select the Search button to repopulate the browser window with available parts. The Zone field is a 10-character field that you define. The zone describes a specific physical location within a stock ID. Only one zone can be used per part or stock ID. In the Quantity field, we will enter the positive or negative quantity for this adjustment. For example, the on-hand balance could be increased by 5 pieces by entering 5, or decreased by 5 pieces by entering -5. Do not enter the total number of pieces currently in the inventory. The General Ledger Reference field allows you to change the default GL accounts normally used for the transaction to now use an override GL account. These accounts are set up in the Financial Integration module. See the lesson on maintaining GL accounts for how to add these codes. Double-click this field to select from the existing codes. The GL account browser window will open. Click the Search button to view a list of existing codes. Double-click a row to select it and place it on the Adjustment tab. MAX associates information entered in the reference field, such as a document control number or other control information, with this specific transaction. Reference information appears on the transaction history reports. These two user-defined fields will display up to 15 and 25 characters respectively. They are free fields for you to enter additional information regarding this transaction. Click the Process button to perform the transaction, and you're done. The upper right pane will now show the new on-hand balance. Now let's try one from the grid. You have the ability to see results of the query in order by part ID or by stock ID. Make a selection here. I will leave it at part ID. You can enter a range to look for using the Start and End fields. Select the Search button to browse for the starting part ID. When you find an item you'd like to use for the starting range, double-click to select it. Now double-click in the End field to open the browser window and search for an ending part ID. Click the Search button, and when all available parts appear in this window, scroll through the list and double-click to choose the one you'd like to use. Once you have chosen a range, select the Query button to display the information. And the results are displayed in the grid. You can then enter the quantity to adjust each part in the grid. Highlight all the rows, or individual rows, or several rows, just like an Excel spreadsheet. Then click the Process button to make the adjustment. To remove the items that currently appear in the lower grid, press the Clear button. When you are finished making adjustment transactions, you can leave this window by choosing the Activity menu and choosing Close. The Close option has put away the transaction window, but we are still here in Inventory Control. To return to the System Manager, click the Activity menu and choose Exit. You are now back at the System Manager. In this lesson, to create an adjustment transaction, we went to the System Manager and the Inventory Control module. We chose the Activity menu, Transactions, and the Adjustment tab. There we entered the part ID and stock location. In this lesson, you have learned how to process an adjustment transaction. Thank you for participating in Exact Training.